This is Andrea. Not long ago we were telling the story of Moses, and it turned out to be such a long story that we decided to tell the end of the story a little bit later, along with two friends of the Bible named Joshua and Rahab. So Moses was a baby who was one of the Hebrew children at a time when it was very dangerous to be Hebrew because of the persecution of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And so he was rescued from a little basket boat that his mother had made for him. And he was rescued by the princess and grew up in a palace. He committed a crime and had to leave Egypt. The crime that he committed was that he had killed an Egyptian who was mistreating a Hebrew. And so he ran out of Egypt and became a shepherd in a land called Midian. God called him to go back to Egypt, and even though he didn't want to go at first, God convinced him, yes, you are going to Egypt. So if you'll go back to our Moses video, you'll find out a lot of things that happened with Moses when he went back to Egypt. There was quite a bit of drama and adventure. But eventually he got the people to follow him, and he got Pharaoh to at least say, and he was pretending, but he did say that they could leave. And so when he got to the Red Sea, he parted the waters of the Red Sea at God's command by holding out his staff, and the waters parted so the people could cross on dry land. And they wandered around in the wilderness for a while. And some of the times they complained because they couldn't get enough water. Water's kind of hard to find in the wilderness. And God said, strike the rock and water will come out. So they did that. Moses and Aaron struck the rock and water came out. The complaining that the Hebrews did about water was called the waters of Meribah, where people complained that they didn't have enough water. And God remembered they had complained, but he wanted them to know that he would always provide what they needed. Moses, when they reached the mountain, which is sometimes called Mount Horeb and sometimes called Mount Sinai, but I'm used to calling it Mount Sinai, he saw God's glory. He was set aside to see God's glory. And you can imagine, if you got to see God's glory, that would be the most wonderful thing you could even hope for in your whole life. And that's the way it was for Moses. In fact, sometimes his face was shining so much from the glory of God that he had to wear a veil over his face so the people wouldn't be afraid. And God gave him the 10 Commandments on 2 tablets of stone written on by the finger of God. Those are the same 10 Commandments that we memorize. And the 4th commandment is honor your parents. And that's one of the easiest ones to obey because our parents love us very much and they want us to honor them. So with God's glory and the 10 Commandments, he had spent a long time with God, and he came down the mountain. So excited to see his people, he couldn't wait to show them the 10 Commandments that he was bringing to them. But he heard an odd noise. He said, "What is this odd noise that I hear? It sounds like tambourines. It sounds like people singing, shouting, dancing. That's the sound that I hear, people having a little too much fun. And I told them to be serious and be ready for when I came down the mountain because God was going to give them something special. Instead, they were dancing. And as he got closer to the people, he saw a golden calf." A golden calf? What was that all about? So he talked to Aaron. He said, "I think I left you in charge. And here I come down the mountain, and here's the golden calf. Why is there a golden calf?" And Aaron said, well, he came up with kind of a lame excuse. He said, "Well, all the people were giving me jewelry, and I just put them all into the fire, and I'll pop this golden calf," as if the calf had made itself. Well, Moses was not happy with Aaron, and he was not happy with the people. And he was so upset that he took the 10 Commandments tablets and he crashed them. And then he crushed them into powder and put the powder in the water and made the people drink it. That's just how upset he was. So he said, no more golden calves. And I am going to go back up the mountain and see if God will give us the 10 Commandments again. So God was very gracious. He wanted his people to have the 10 Commandments, and yes, he did. Write on tablets of stone with the finger of God the 10 Commandments, which we now love and memorize. And Moses was getting old, but he really wanted to hope to see the promised land someday. And God said to him, speak to the rock, and the rock will give you water. But Moses thought, I don't know. Last time I just struck the rock, I think I'll just strike the rock. He didn't really pay attention to what God was saying, because what God's words are very important. He doesn't choose the wrong words. And so Moses struck the rock. He said, do I have to strike the rock for you people? That was not a good decision, because God had said, speak to the rock. And I've heard that some people interpret this as the first time you strike the rock, and that reminds us of when Jesus was struck before he died. And the second time you speak to the rock, and that reminds us of the power and glory of Jesus after he rose from the dead. That's just an interpretation that just file it away somewhere and see if you remember that later on. So Joshua was chosen to lead the people into the promised land, and Moses was told, your lifetime is up. You're going to go be with God, and we're going to give you one chance. God said, we'll give you a chance to see the promised land, but you're not going to go there. So he looked down the mountain at the promised land, and at least he got to see it before he went to be with God. Now Joshua was a good leader, and he had a couple of ideas. One of his ideas was to send some people into the countryside of the promised land and see what they would find out about how things were growing and what size the people were. And they came back with reports. They said, well, the people are pretty big and they look pretty strong, and we're pretty small. We're worried about this. And also they have beautiful, beautiful clusters of grapes. They're just growing on these large vines, and it's just such a wonderful place. But we're kind of scared of the people, and we don't want to go in. Well, only one person was faithful to God and knew that God would win the battle, and that was Caleb. And so Joshua really honored Caleb by giving him plenty of land when the land was all divided. Another thing Joshua had that was a good idea was that he said we would go send a couple of spies into the city of Jericho. And a woman named Rahab, who lived there with her family, she helped the spies, and she hid them from the people who were in charge of the city. You know what? I forgot to tell you about when they crossed the Jordan River. They can't go into Jericho or spy out the land until they cross the Jordan River. So let's back up a little bit. Nothing wrong with that. And we're going to back up and talk about crossing the Jordan River. Because the Jordan River has come to represent, our passage from life to death. But the Jordan River is a real river. And the way they crossed it was different from the way they crossed the Red Sea, where the waters parted. Because a river only flows down, right? Because gravity, seeks the level at the lowest level. And so what happened, as soon as the people of the Hebrews started across the river, the water stopped flowing and just stacked up behind. So that was a pretty exciting way to cross the Jordan River, and it ceased to flow. And that's after that crossing the Jordan River. It's when they went into the countryside and when they went into Jericho. And God said, I'm going to give you the city of Jericho, and here's how you're going to do it. You're going to walk around Jericho 6 times. Once each day, walk all the way around the city. Don't say anything, don't do anything, just walk around the city. Well, that might have kind of freaked the people out who were living in the city. And on the 7th day, you are going to have the priests blow the ram's horn Ram's horn were really, really long horns. Have the priest blow the ram's horns. You're going to march around the city a 7th time, and then you're going to shout, and the walls will come tumbling down. That's exactly what happened. The 7th day they shouted, and the walls came tumbling down, and the city belonged to the Hebrews. But they saved Rahab's family because she had been very helpful to the spies who came into Jericho. So now we've reminded us about part of Moses' life. We've gotten to know Joshua and Rahab. So what we did to start here, we started with Samuel, went all the way through to the divided kingdom, came back and picked up the ancient heroes of the Bible all the way through to Joshua. Then I can't wait to tell you about a friend of God who was named Daniel. Daniel was a wonderful, wonderful hero in the time of the exile. And so next time we get together, that's exactly who we will be talking about. So thank you for joining me.